Africa is francophone. I mean, they have a gazillion tribal languages, but that was all colonized by France. So like Algeria, it's the same. But Morocco, Burkina Faso.
I think we're supposed to start. I know Mel.
Well, it's
here you see. Okay.
It's 10 o'clock. So.
Welcome to the 6th annual Tucson Festival of Books. My name is Melanie Lenart, and first we'd just like to begin for thanking the City of Tucson for sponsoring this venue, and also Ventana Medical Systems for sponsoring this particular session. And of course, we want to thank all of you for coming. And afterward, there will be a signing. We'll take Alan to a signing area, which is actually right across from the Union in the U of A bookstore tent. And we'll remind you at the end, too. So basically, we are so lucky to have with us today Alan Weisman, who's an international journalist and author, who's written for New York Times Magazine, Orion, Mother Jones, Discover, the Best Science Writing of 2006. And besides some of his award-winning articles, he's also won awards for several of his previous books, including Gaviotas, A Village to Reinvent the World, and The World Without Us, which was named Top Nonfiction Book of the Year by Entertainment Weekly and Time Magazine, among others. And so a lot of you probably know him from that. And Alan, I have to say that your book, The World Without Us, was one of the most inspiring things that I've ever read. You had people benignly disappear and then described how the cities and farms and rivers and mountain lions would soon revert back to a more natural state. That book was translated into 34 languages, which means a lot of people found it inspiring. And Countdown already has been translated. It's coming out with 15 foreign editions and more in the way. So it's another top seller around the world, which is no wonder since he visited 21 countries to produce it. So basically, given your past success with World Without Us and what you learned on that, I'm sure a lot of us are wondering what inspired you to write Countdown?
Thanks. Hey, thank you all for coming. This is really nice. Some of you do know The World Without Us. For those of you who don't, just suffice it to say that I wrote that book because I really want a world with us. The idea of, as she said, benignly removing a species to which we are all intimately involved was to show how, when relieved of the daily pressures that we heap on the planet, the Earth rebounds in surprisingly swift and wonderful ways, eventually even refills empty niches that we have inadvertently extinguished their residents. My hope was that people would see this restored Earth and wonder, okay, is there any way that we can add ourselves back into this picture, only this time in nice harmony and balance with the rest of nature, not in mortal combat with it? And so the epilogue for that book was intended to be just a little discussion about how we might do that. But I ran into a rather disturbing fact, and that is that you see these figures on population, and they're so big you can't get your mind around them, but thanks to the invention of the calculator, I did some long division by 365, and I found out that basically every 4 to 4.5 days, we add 1 million people to the planet. And this is not a sustainable number. So at the end of that book, I did this other little thought experiment, which I hadn't even planned on. I asked Demographics Institute in Vienna, which is one of the premier such organizations, what would happen if, setting aside all social concerns, everyone participated in the Chinese policy from then on, and we only had 1 child per family? And it turns out that instead our numbers go like this, suddenly they would go like this, and by the end of this century, we'd be back at about 1.6 billion, which was exactly the population of the Earth in 1900, before our population suddenly doubled and then doubled again. We quadrupled in 1 century for reasons I'm sure we're going to get into. So I sort of left that dangling at the end of the world without us. The idea of, wow, how many of us is a safe population on this planet, and is this something that we should be talking about when we talk about how to deal with environmental concerns? And I expected a lot of blowback. Instead, what I got was just an onrush of interest from a lot of readers. Everyone wanted to talk about this thing, and I was on Catholic radio programs, and I gave talks in Mormon, Utah, and still everybody got the fact that things are more crowded than they were before, and God, all these cities that are endless and all the smog. And finally, I decided, well, it's a really important topic, but it's also a really explosive one. And people get really passionate about it because religion and economics, growth, that's what makes it, our economy healthy. You know, there's a lot of stuff tangled up in there. So I decided someone should really explore this topic, not as pro-population control. I mean, that itself is a loaded word, so we say population management, or anti. Explore it as a journalist does. Really research this thing and try to find out, can we determine how many people the Earth can safely hold without tipping it over? The converse of that, can we figure out how much nature we need to preserve? Because we're getting so numerous, we're starting to push other stuff off the planet at an increasing pace, and at a certain point, we're going to push something off we won't realize until it's too late that, oops, we should have kept that one. Given that what comes to mind, everybody's mind, is that Chinese one-child policy, and nobody likes it, including the Chinese. Are there other approaches? Is there anything in the histories, the liturgies, or the current experiences of the world's vast swath of cultures that might embrace the idea of, so to speak, refraining from embracing so much in a time of urgency? And then last, the one about economics, like, can we, if we have to stop growing or even shrink to a sustainable size, is there a way to design an economy that will allow us to prosper without constant growth? So particularly that third question, the one about all the cultures, et cetera, that's why I ended up going to 21 countries for this book. I started in Israel and Palestine, and I ended in Iran.
All good stuff, and many of these topics that you mentioned in passing we'll want to come back and delve into. And I also did want to let you know we're going to leave some time for questions from the audience toward the end, so if you have any, you can think of them. But let's start out, not everyone actually even considers population a problem, and given all the other problems that are vying for attention, why do you consider it a serious problem, and how does it rank among the others?
Well, I think it's the problem that underlies all the problems. We wouldn't have environmental problems if one species hadn't grown suddenly so numerous. I mean, we are basically in the most abnormal growth spurt of any population in the history of biology. And we don't really notice it that much because we all were born in the middle of it, and it looks kind of normal to us. Let me explain a little bit. Well, first I should mention, it just seems so obvious when you think about this, and yet most environmental groups don't really like to touch this one at all. And the reason for that is it's really understandable, because this is a topic that makes us uncomfortable. It certainly makes me uncomfortable. Like every other organism, we were designed to make copies of ourselves. In fact, we were designed to make extra copies of ourselves because, sadly enough, most babies didn't make it to their 5th birthday. That pretty much happens throughout all nature. So the idea was, your great-great-great-grandmother might have had 8 or 9 kids, but maybe 2 or 3 survived. Population grew very, very, very slowly through 99% of human history.